I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who got escorted out of her daughter's birthday party. My name is Helen Price. I'm 62 years old, a retired literature teacher from Boston. If you'd told me a decade ago that I would be asked to leave my own child's celebration like an unwanted guest, I would have laughed. But that night, under the chandelier light of the Fairmont Ballroom, no one was laughing. The jazz band had just finished their second set when the host, my daughter Amelia, stood up with a glass of champagne in her hand. Her dress shimmered like silver water. I watched her from the table near the back, where they'd seated me with a few of Cole's business friends, people I'd never met. She raised her glass, smiling toward her mother-in-law, Vivian Sterling, the chairwoman of Sterling and Vale Holdings. "Tonight," Amelia said into the microphone, "I want to thank the woman who taught me everything about grace, strength, and success. My mother, Vivian." Applause erupted, forks clinking against glass. I smiled weakly, waiting for the part where she'd add, "And my real mother, who raised me when life was hard. It never came." Instead, Amelia turned toward me, eyes polished cold. "And to those who came here uninvited," she continued, "please respect my wish and leave. This is my night." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. The room froze, just the sound of the band tuning quietly in confusion. Then the hotel manager stepped closer, his voice a polite whisper. "Ma'am, would you like me to show you out?" My knees felt hollow. People avoided my gaze, pretending to check their phones. I heard my own heartbeat louder than the music, felt the burn of humiliation rise up my neck. I managed a nod, gathered my shawl, and walked toward the exit while the applause started again, this time softer, more uneasy. Behind me. Amelia laughed at something Vivian whispered. Their voices dissolved into the noise of the party, as if I'd never existed. Outside, the night was sharp with December wind. The doorman offered to call a cab, but I shook my head. I wanted the cold, the distance, anything that could numb the sound of my daughter's voice. On the sidewalk, I saw my reflection in the restaurant window, just another older woman carrying flowers that no one wanted. That was the moment I realized silence had erased me long before Amelia did. And for the first time in 35 years, I wasn't sure if being a good mother had ever been enough. When I got home that night, the city was already asleep. The snow had turned to a thin layer of slush that clung to my boots as I stepped into my apartment. The smell of old coffee lingered in the kitchen, and the silence felt heavy, like a punishment. I set the flowers on the counter. The white lilies I'd bought for Amelia were already starting to wilt, their petals curling inward as if ashamed to be seen. I didn't cry right away. I just sat at the small table by the window, watching headlights smear across the glass. I kept hearing her voice echo inside me. "Please leave." 2 words, polite but final. I'd heard rude people in my life, ungrateful students, careless colleagues, but never my own child sounding so complete in her rejection. By morning, the event had already made the social pages. Sterling heiress celebrates birthday with her mentor, Vivian Sterling. I wasn't mentioned, of course. The photos showed Amelia in her silver dress, her hand resting on Vivian's arm like they'd shared a lifetime together. Maybe, in some twisted way, they had. One built on money and power, not blood and sacrifice. I made tea, sat in my robe, and looked at my phone, hoping for a message. None came. Not from Amelia. Not from my son Mason either. I told myself I should stop waiting. Disappointment only has power if you keep opening the door for it. The knock that came 2 days later wasn't from Amelia. It was from Dana, my daughter-in-law. Her face was pale from the cold. a kind of worry written across her forehead. She carried a grocery bag with muffins and oranges, the kind of gesture people make when they don't know what to say. "I saw the photos," she said softly, setting the bag on the counter. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, because that's what mothers do. We lie to make the world easier for others. Dana hesitated, then reached into her purse. "There's something you should see. I didn't know whether to show Mason or not, but it's about Amelia's company, about the Sterlings." She handed me a folded printout, an internal memo from Sterling and Vale. I wasn't familiar with legal jargon, but one sentence stopped me cold. Authorization of transfer signed under Amelia Rhodes Sterling, my daughter's name, stamped in bold letters, under an account number worth millions. The signature line below it wasn't hers. It was Vivian's, traced and reprinted as witness. I stared at it, the paper trembling in my hands. "Where did you get this?" Dana's eyes flicked toward the window, as if afraid the walls could listen. "A friend from the accounting department sent it to me. Off the record. They said Amelia might be taking the fall for something the family did." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I thought of the way Amelia looked at me at that party, not like a daughter, but like a stranger protecting her new world. Maybe she wasn't just protecting it. Maybe she was trapped inside it. I leaned back, feeling the edges of everything tilt. "They're using her," I whispered. Dana nodded. "If that memo's real, she's signing things she doesn't understand. And if it ever blows up, she'll be the one blamed." My first instinct was disbelief. Surely Amelia was too smart to be fooled. But then I remembered the way Vivian's hand had rested on her shoulder that night. Possessive, guiding. I remembered the headlines that called Amelia the next generation of sterling brilliance. All those titles had been gifts wrapped in strings. Dana reached across the table, her voice steady but urgent. "You've got to talk to someone. A lawyer, maybe." I looked around the apartment. The faded curtains, the unpaid bills stacked near the toaster, the framed essay Amelia wrote when she was 12, "My mother is my hero." I'd given up so much to keep her safe, to give her everything she needed to stand on her own, and somehow, standing on her own had turned into standing on top of me. "I will," I said finally, more to myself than to Dana, but not because I want revenge, because I want my daughter back, before they erase her too. The kettle whistled, sharp and high. I poured hot water into 2 cups, the steam rising between us like a fragile truce. Outside, the snow began again, quiet, endless, covering every trace of the night before. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Boston was gray and quiet, the kind of cold that makes the air sting. I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying that memo Dana had shown me, those printed lines that made my stomach twist. My daughter's name, her handwriting forged, her trust used like a shield for someone else's crime. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam curling from the mug. For most of my life, silence had been my defense. I'd stayed quiet when my husband left debts I had to clean up, when Amelia said she was ashamed of the way I dressed at her wedding, when Mason told me, "Mom, just let her be." But silence had gotten me here, erased, invisible, disposable. At 9 o'clock, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Arthur Levin, attorney at law," the voice said. He'd been one of my former students before law school, now a seasoned lawyer in Back Bay who handled corporate fraud. "Arthur, it's Helen Price," I said. "I need your help." He paused for half a breath, the kind of pause that carries 20 years of unspoken stories. "Come by my office, 10:30, and Helen, bring whatever you've got." By the time I got there, the city was awake. Arthur's office smelled like paper and strong coffee. He still had that same calm, analytical gaze I remembered from his debate days. I placed the printout on his desk, the edges already soft from my fingers. He read in silence, his pen tapping once against the page. "You said this came from someone inside Sterling and Vale?" I nodded. "A friend of my daughter-in-law. I know it's risky, but I couldn't ignore it." Arthur leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "Risky is an understatement. If this document is real, it's evidence of transfer fraud and corporate misrepresentation. But we can't use it publicly yet. It's hearsay until verified. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state, so we can't record anyone without permission. You'll need a paper trail, not a tape." I swallowed hard. "Can we prove she didn't know what she was signing?" "Maybe," he said, flipping the memo. "But we need to move smart. The State Attorney General's office has a whistleblower program, anonymous submissions. If we can find more documents, emails, internal memos, audit reports, we can file a tip under confidentiality." The words whistleblower and confidentiality sounded like something from another world, but in that moment, they were my lifeline. Arthur slid a notepad toward me. "Write down everything you know about Amelia's role at the company, titles, dates, any public appearances. Be specific, but keep emotions out of it. We'll let the evidence carry the feeling." I wanted to argue that feelings were the reason I was here at all, but he was right. Logic first, emotion later. I wrote until my hand cramped. When I finished, he nodded, folded the memo into a file, and locked it in his cabinet. "I'll handle the legal side," he said. "You stay quiet for now. No confrontation, no public mention. If this blows up too soon, they'll paint you as a bitter mother trying to destroy her daughter's career." That last line hit hard because it wasn't just hypothetical. It was exactly what they would say. I thanked him and left the office, walking back into the city's noise. The world outside felt unchanged, but I wasn't the same woman who'd walked in. On the subway ride home, I watched people reading newspapers, scrolling through phones, chasing lives that weren't collapsing. I wondered how many of them had lost someone not to death, but to pride. When I stepped off at my stop, the sky had started to clear. I could almost see the edge of spring hiding behind the gray clouds. For the first time since that night, I felt a pulse of direction, something sharper than sadness, steadier than anger. Silence had protected me for too long. Now it was going to protect the truth. The week after my meeting with Arthur felt longer than any winter I could remember. Each morning, I waited for his call, half afraid, half desperate. The air outside my apartment stayed cold, stubbornly gray. I went through my routine like a ghost, coffee, dishes, the walk to the mailbox, yet every sound seemed sharper, every silence heavier. 3 days passed before my phone finally rang. Arthur's voice was steady, but I could tell something had shifted. "Helen, someone from inside Sterling and Vale just reached out. They didn't give a name, but they said they've seen the transfers, multiple accounts. They're willing to send proof." My pulse jumped. Proof? What kind? Internal balance sheets, email threads, metadata logs. If they're real, it's everything we need. He paused. "But we have to protect the source. I'll have them send it through an encrypted channel." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with the lights off, watching snow fall through the street lamps. Somewhere out there, someone was risking their job, or worse, to expose what my daughter had been dragged into. The next morning, I went to Arthur's office again. His assistant greeted me with a look that told me the documents had arrived. On his desk sat a flash drive and a printed email. The subject line read, "For the record, Trust Fund Transfer Trail." Arthur inserted the drive, scrolling through files. There were spreadsheets, statements, and a series of emails between Vivian Sterling and her son Cole. The first one made my throat tighten. Keep the transfers under Amelia's name. She'll never ask questions. If anything happens, we'll say she acted independently. I pressed my hand to my mouth. The room felt smaller. Arthur looked at me, his jaw tight. They were planning this for months. Vivian signed everything under Amelia's proxy authorization. It's legal camouflage, dirty, but clever. Will it hold up? I asked. He nodded slowly. If verified, yes. The audit trail is solid, but to use it, we'll need corroboration. Someone from inside the finance department to confirm these logs weren't doctored. As if on cue. Dana texted me. Check your email. You need to see this. At home. I opened her message. She'd forwarded a note from her friend in accounting, short, trembling sentences that said more than any document could. They're shifting liability to your daughter. They're afraid the state will find the missing assets. I can't stay here much longer. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. The whistleblower wasn't just anonymous anymore. They were terrified. By evening, Arthur had filed the first confidential submission to the state attorney general's office. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, just a tip, a spark in a very dark room. You understand what happens next? He said over the phone. They'll investigate quietly. It could take weeks. But if this goes public before the board acts, they'll circle the wagons. Keep quiet. Helen. I promised I would, but my silence felt different this time. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. That night, Mason came over after work. He'd always been the quieter of my two kids, practical to a fault. He didn't even sit down before speaking. Dana told me what's going on. Mom, is it true? About Amelia? I showed him the printout, the signatures, the emails. His face paled as he read. Jesus, he whispered. They're framing her. He looked up at me, something fierce replacing his shock. We can't just sit on this. I can trace the metadata, verify timestamps, see if the files line up. I hesitated. Arthur said not to expose anything yet. I'm not exposing, he said. I'm verifying. If they ever question the authenticity, we'll have proof these files came straight from Sterling's network. I realized then how much my children had switched places. My son, now the protector. My daughter, the one who needed saving. By midnight, Mason had confirmed it. The logs were genuine. The IP addresses led back to Sterling and Vale's corporate server. There was no room left for denial. I stood at the window again. Snow catching in the streetlights like ash. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or powerless. Somewhere in that cold city, the truth had found its witness. The night of the gala felt like a storm waiting to happen, even though the sky above Boston was perfectly still. The Fairmont's ballroom glowed with golden light, violins humming through the chatter of 100 guests in silk and tuxedos. Every inch of that room reeked of money and certainty, the kind of certainty that makes people think they can bury the truth forever. I arrived in a dark dress, simple but deliberate, invited under Arthur's name as a foundation sponsor. Dana and Mason were already seated near the back, pretending to be donors from Cambridge. Arthur stood near the corridor that led to the private boardroom, calm as ever, holding an envelope that contained a letter powerful enough to break the Sterling empire. Across the ballroom, I saw Amelia. She looked beautiful in navy blue, radiant under the chandeliers, but her smile was tight, practiced. Vivian Sterling floated beside her, flawless and commanding, every gesture polished for the cameras. Cole trailed behind them, the obedient son and husband, his phone never leaving his hand. I took a seat, my fingers tracing the rim of my water glass to hide their trembling. The dinner moved slowly, soup, Fish, wine. Each course felt like a countdown. I barely tasted a thing. At exactly 7 o'clock, Arthur's courier delivered the demand letter to the board upstairs. If they didn't agree to the terms, Vivian's suspension, a full audit, restitution for the diverted funds, Maya Torres's article would go live before midnight. Time crawled. The orchestra played something cheerful, but the tension in the room buzzed like static. Around 8:30, I saw movement at the back doors. Board members were slipping out of the private meeting, their faces stiff and colorless. Arthur followed, closing his briefcase with quiet finality. He gave me a slight nod. My breath caught. It was done. Moments later, the host tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "the Sterling and Vale Board has an announcement to make." Conversations hushed, glasses lowered. A tall man in a gray suit, Chairman Collins, walked up to the stage. He spoke with careful precision. "Effective immediately, Ms. Vivian Sterling will step aside pending an independent investigation into the company's recent transactions. The board has also approved the appointment of an external monitor to ensure full transparency." For a second, no one breathed. Then the room erupted. Whispers, gasps, camera flashes. Vivian's expression froze, the elegant mask cracking just enough for the light to catch it. Cole's face went blank, his phone sliding from his hand onto the tablecloth. Amelia turned toward her mother-in-law, confusion flooding her features. She whispered something, but Vivian didn't answer. Her jaw tightened, her eyes burning with quiet fury. I sat perfectly still. For the first time in months, I wasn't invisible. I didn't gloat or smile. I simply watched the walls of deceit fold in on themselves, inch by inch. When Amelia's gaze finally found mine across the room, the noise around us dimmed. Her eyes were wide, not angry, not proud, just lost, like a child waking from a dream that had turned into a nightmare. The host tried to resume the music, but no one listened. People murmured about corporate scandals, fake signatures, a cover-up. The truth had arrived wearing its finest clothes, and it didn't care whose party it ruined. As I stood to leave, Arthur joined me near the doorway. He handed me a copy of the signed term sheet, Vivian's resignation under provisional agreement. "It's over," he said quietly. "No," I whispered. "It's just beginning." I turned back one last time. Amelia was standing alone now, champagne untouched, staring at the stage as if she could still hear her mother-in-law's voice echoing there. Outside, the wind had picked up. The city lights shimmered against the frozen sidewalks. I pulled my coat tighter and let the night air fill my lungs. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like justice finally breathing. It's strange how peace can feel unfamiliar after so many years of noise. 2 months have passed since the gala, yet I still wake up expecting a fight, some new headline, a call from a reporter, another question about the scandal. But the city has gone quiet. The storm came, did its damage, and left behind a sky I can finally see through. Vivian Sterling's name still appears in the papers sometimes, tucked between stories about resignations and settlements. The board paid its fines, the company restructured, and the press moved on. Justice, in the real world, never arrives with a trumpet. It just quietly settles into the air. Amelia visited me last week. I didn't expect her. She stood at my door holding a box of old photographs, school plays, beach trips, Christmas mornings I'd half forgotten. Her eyes were tired, softer somehow, as if the walls around her had finally cracked. "I didn't come to make excuses," she said. "I came to remember who I was before all this." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd stared at that forged memo months ago. She ran her fingers over a photo of us at her high school graduation, my hand on her shoulder. her smile bright and real. "I thought strength meant never needing anyone," she said. "But maybe it means admitting when you do." I didn't have an answer. I just reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That was enough. Later that evening, after she left, I walked through Copley Square. The air smelled like rain and library books, and the city lights reflected in the puddles like small, forgiving stars. I stopped outside the Boston Public Library, where the sign for my foundation gleamed in the window. The voice returns. Inside, a group of women sat in a circle, sharing stories. Some cried, some laughed, all of them learning to speak again. I thought about my daughter's voice, the one that had once told me to leave, and how, in its own broken way, it had led me here. Maybe that's what healing really is, not erasing the pain, but learning to carry it until it becomes lighter. As I locked the office door that night, I looked up at the sky, the same city, the same cold air, yet everything felt different. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be heard. I already was. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.